Good morning, everyone. What's on the agenda today? We'll discuss the issue of expulsion, deportation, call it what you will, of Ukrainians or Ukrainian men from abroad, particularly from the European Union. The thing is, just yesterday, the Commissioner for Ukrainian Refugees, Ilva Johansson, stated that, in her opinion, Ukrainian men should be expelled from Europe because Europe supports. Well, in my opinion, there's zero logic here, but that's what she says because Europe supports Ukraine. Ukraine is at war right now, so it turns out that those who need protection should be expelled and sent back to Ukraine. Don't ask me where the logic is here or how to find it, I don't know, but this isn't the first time such a conversation has happened. And this is not just some minor deputy, so to speak, of the European Union, but quite an official person who may be expressing a personal opinion. Nevertheless, she is speaking as the Commissioner for Ukrainian Refugees in the European Union. Here is the video. Of course, I won't show the whole thing because it's pretty boring, but we'll watch part of it so it's clear what she's actually talking about.
You said that temporary protection will be extended with some amendments.
Yes, with some amendments. Here for other Ukrainians, to get ahead of myself, everything will be as before until 2027. Most likely it's not even the last year when refugee protection for people from Ukraine will be confirmed, but possibly this may no longer apply to draft-age Ukrainian men.
We talked about the possibility of restrictions for military-age men, for newly arrived refugees.
Yes, that is for those who are military-age refugees or those who are arriving from Ukraine. Well, for example, someone who escaped from Ukraine to Romania.
This is what is currently being discussed among the member states, and so far there is no consensus on this issue.
There is no consensus among the countries. Nevertheless, the discussion on this issue is ongoing. And this again gives you something to think about.
In my personal opinion, it doesn't seem entirely logical that many draft-eligible men who are not allowed to leave Ukraine as soon as they cross the border, possibly even illegally, immediately receive temporary protection.
Well, that's her personal opinion. Here she has already spoken out, saying, in my personal opinion, the crossing of borders by conscripted men in Ukraine by men is illogical because they are breaking Ukrainian law. How can breaking the law of Ukraine even concern her if it violates... Again, following this law violates human rights, and human rights are supposedly protected by everyone in Borrell's Paradise Garden. It's not entirely clear, but that's how it is. And it would all be one thing if these same talks hadn't been going on before too. For example, in Poland, as I already mentioned, they want to deport Ukrainians even for very minor violations. 2 violations in a row, deportation. The first one, previously this used to carry an administrative penalty, but now 2 intentional minor violations. Speeding, illegal parking, jaywalking, not wearing a seatbelt, drinking alcohol in a prohibited place, making noise at night, littering, disturbing the peace and quiet. By the way, a lot of things can fall under this. Riding without a ticket, well, petty theft, I completely support that one. Nevertheless, several dozen men have already been deported from Poland, one of whom arrived drunk at a kindergarten, I mentioned this before, in order to pick up his daughter from that very kindergarten. Drunk driving, in my strong opinion, is a threat of murder to other citizens, and for that people should be punished by having their license revoked and possibly a huge fine or even imprisonment. But this man was deported straight to Ukraine, where he was immediately picked up at the border by Ukrainian draft officers, and where he is now we do not know. Most likely he has already been taken, and now he is serving somewhere on the front lines, definitely not where the barbershop guys serve, but somewhere he is serving. Then what? Then, on my Telegram channel? By the way, you can subscribe to it by pointing your phone or tablet camera at this QR code, or you can find the link in the description of this video. So today on my Telegram channel I found an absolutely amazing piece of news. The thing is, a citizen of Moldova had his Ukrainian citizenship restored in 2023 without his knowledge, after it had previously been revoked in 2020, and it was because of his Moldovan citizenship. He was mobilized right at the border in April 2026. He lived, was registered, and had an internal passport in Moldova. His daughter was there too, so his so-called center of vital interest was in Moldova. According to him, according to his lawyer and the man himself, he received Ukrainian citizenship in 2019, then it was annulled, and later the Ukrainian authorities informed him that his citizenship would be restored starting from 2023. It's just amazing because having your citizenship revoked and then later restored is extremely strange. And it was most likely done specifically to replenish that very mobilization pool that all these bearded, scruffy individuals who just came out of restaurants are talking about. And then they start talking about who should be fighting and how. And again, I showed that one of them, actually, there are thousands of these men exempt from mobilization in Ukraine, those who have never fought. But they say that citizens should go and fight for their freedom with their teeth, biting into the enemy while they themselves only bite into liver pies or maybe even foie gras. And I showed. One of them is fishing. Another went to Italy. A third also went to Italy with his wife. A fourth is buying apartments in Spain, while ordinary Ukrainian men are being oppressed by everyone who feels like it. No, of course, there are exceptions, but still. Here's another recent piece of news besides what I've already shown. This is literally from May 19th. In the Czech Republic, they're proposing to limit temporary protection for Ukrainians. And here it talks about a restriction that negotiations are already underway with the European Union about possibly cancelling temporary protection for military-age Ukrainian men. So here we see that Poland has already talked about this, and now the Czech Republic is talking about it, and Zelensky discussed the same thing with Partegenos Merz for Germany. Prague wants to tighten the rules for foreigners staying in the country, including for Ukrainians with temporary protection status. Because there are already too many Ukrainians here and we have to do something about it, said Akamura. By the way, he is a Czech of Japanese origin, but it's interesting how often you hear this from people who also... Well, anyway, let's not go into details. In short, the politician added that the final decision will depend on the positions of the European Union and the support of other member countries. The same thing that this Commissioner for the Rights of Refugees from Ukraine in Europe was saying. Now, European countries must reach an agreement. Honestly, there's an opinion that they won't reach an agreement. But looking at how actively the issue of protecting Ukraine and Europe is being discussed, this steel porcupine, with its quills aimed at Russia and its snout pointed at Europe, raises a question. Is it really true that Europe will actually defend the rights and freedoms of Ukrainian citizens? In my opinion, if the question arises whether to send soldiers from Europe itself to fight against Russia or to use Ukrainians instead, let them die there, let those draft enforcers and all the others cripple them there. But the question will be clear for Europe. Of course, let Ukraine do it, we supported them, we support women there, we support children, and you go ahead and fight there. Overall, from the European side, again, well, as a Ukrainian, of course, I find that idea repugnant, but if I were purely Spanish, let me remind you, I am a citizen of Spain, I've been living in Spain for many, many years. If I were purely Spanish, then naturally the problems of Ukrainians probably wouldn't affect me as much as my own. If someone told me, amigo, come on, go fight in the war with Russia, being Spanish and especially to defend Ukraine, about which the average Spaniard doesn't really know much, well, he knows it's somewhere out there, but what is it doing there? Maybe from the European side, of course, that's the right thing to do, but here a question arises about the Ukrainian authorities, who understand this self-serving attitude on the part of Europeans, and naturally the US as well. And they don't care, they say it directly, even Zelensky himself said that it's cheaper for Europe to use Ukrainians than their own soldiers. Someone even said that this is the right thing to do because we are the shield of Europe and Ukrainians are shielding Europe with their own backs. Of course, it wasn't combat soldiers or officers who said this, but those barber shop guys who first use their mouths in restaurants consuming food and then use the same mouths somewhere in a studio, impressing everyone with their oral oratorical abilities, and pouring out all sorts of their opinions onto the heads of citizens who may be impressionable or maybe not, but in any case it only causes rejection. These verbal constructions of theirs are quite strange, so the issue here is actually complicated. The only thing I want to say for reassurance is that, of course, no one is going to deport Ukrainians tomorrow just because someone, whether it's Ilva, Ilyin, Mylirma, or whoever, said it would be a good idea. No, it's a very long bureaucratic process, so maybe they'll decide something by the end of 2026 partially. Maybe they'll decide something in 2027. But again, this will still be discussed for a long time. But I want to emphasize that it's better to think about it because the discussion is ongoing and basically everything is moving in that direction. Not very fast, but it's moving. You can't compare this to Krylov's fable, where the swan, crayfish, and pike pull the cart in different directions. Now they're mostly in sync and heading the same way. So, well, I would like to advise changing refugee status to something else. If you're in Europe, learn the language if you haven't already, and get a job if, for some reason, you still haven't found one. As for the discussions themselves, back in April it was said that the European Union would introduce strict filters and reconsider its strategy regarding the stay of Ukrainian refugees on its territory. We're told that the approved plan turned out to be ineffective, and in Brussels they're already preparing a new large-scale reform which could drastically reduce the number of people eligible for legal asylum. And because of the complexity of the bureaucracy, the rate of successful transitions to other statuses is low. Only a few countries have started developing clear mechanisms for transitioning from refugee status to other forms of protection. Poland and the Czech Republic have, but most European Union countries still have not provided clear instructions. Nevertheless, the process is ongoing, there's no doubt about that. Those who want to transition are doing so, with few exceptions. And once again, the initiative comes from Ylva Johansson herself, who just spoke before us. She clearly wants Ukrainians to return to Ukraine so that they fight there. Here's another report on the same story. From the 19th, it's a repetition of the same words. Here is what Johansson herself says. And on top of that, for some reason, Ukraine also started preparing for the return of 2 million people as early as April, again in 2026, that is this year. Why and for what purpose, I don't know, but nevertheless, preparations are underway. They write to us that it's approximately up to 2 million people. And on top of that, the government plans to develop communities, not just provide assistance to individuals. Apparently, this will help a lot. There is a certain Minister of Social Policy, Denis Ulyutin, who expects about 2 million citizens to arrive in Ukraine after the war, after the end of active combat operations. In his opinion, the National Defense University says that our communities should be able to accommodate such a number of new residents. That is why it is important to focus not on individual assistance to returnees, but on supporting communities. These very communities, which I mentioned earlier, are an extremely convenient way to siphon off budget funds. Just like, for example, budget funds are siphoned off by the Ukrainian mayor of Mariupol, the Ukrainian mayor of Bakhmut Artyomovsk, there are still such people. Even the Luhansk administration, I think, still exists on the Ukrainian side and receives money almost for building schools, again in the Luhansk region. Don't ask why or for what reason, but budget funds are being siphoned off. But imagine there's some kind of community, I'm not sure what, but hypothetically, a society or group of about 1,000 people. They have one leader, then a deputy, a secretary, a manager, a fire safety specialist, some kind of sanitary instructor, and a dog handler. Well, let's add him just for the sake of it. And so the budget comes in, and naturally, the mayor starts distributing it. First, of course, he'll set the salary for the mayor, the dog handler. Well, the dog handler will be last. Nevertheless. And then, after all these organizational matters and funds have been taken care of, the money will start going to help some communities. And suddenly, in this community, it turns out his godfather, brother, in-law, wife, or the grandnephew of his third cousin is there. Who do you think will be the first to receive these funds? Again, these are funds that came into the budget of this very community from taxes, from the state budget, that is, from the taxes of the citizens of Ukraine. Well, naturally, first it will be that very grandnephew of the second cousin's grandmother, along with all those godparents, in-laws, and all sorts of other relatives. And only then will everyone else get something. Well, plus, we shouldn't forget about law enforcement agencies and many, many others. So that's the reason why they don't want to introduce individual protection, but instead want to do who knows what. This is also Zelensky, I've already mentioned this, but even last year when... Actually, not even last year, I think it was in 2023 when the European Union allocated huge funds to help refugees from Ukraine, and within each country some funds were allocated. He said, listen, you give us this money and we will distribute it to the refugees ourselves in a targeted way. So the idea was that the European Union would send money to Ukraine, and then Ukraine would generously distribute it to orphans and those in need. Funds that weren't actually used by the people who once again are building these pretty nice houses. In wartime, a fortification is something everyone wants to have. Pisrus ranks, as our foreign minister Sibiga says. And well, yeah, it's a complete mess. That's not an insult either, it's his own words. An attempt to speak English. Anyway, let's take a look at the powerful leaders now. Where are they here? We have one here, I've shown him before, but it's worth showing again. I'll show him at the end of the video. This mama's boy appears very often, not only on Channel 5 Studio, but also on others. And he talks about all sorts of patriotic things, while of course being a super soldier, a Super Terminator T-3500 Ultra Plus Max.
Basically, internet access is becoming a privilege for the Russian army and officials.
This is being said by a person who also advocated for blocking Telegram, for blocking everything that distracts Ukrainians from what? From the war. Honestly, again, I don't understand the discussions in Ukraine about what is being blocked in Russia, because Ukraine just goes and copies those same bans at home. Right now, a huge number of all sorts of officials, petty lawmakers, and others are saying that Telegram is harmful. Other Russian resources are not that harmful. And Elon Musk is no different. His X should also be blocked, kept out, denied access. So
that it won't be accessible to the average Russian. Discontent is growing in the troops. Putin is openly afraid because he's unsure if his special services, including the FSB, can protect him during potential uprisings because the front is faltering. The Russians have virtually no advantage, not even tactically.
Well, basically, everything got mixed up. People, horses, pies, flies, cutlets. This little darling threw everything together just to deliver some kind of patriotic speech. It didn't turn out very well, but at least he spoke. Then we have Vujko from Polonina. Vujko from Polonina, looking slyly at the journalist, says that Russia can't strike Ukraine with nuclear weapons. Why? Now the expert will tell us.
Russia began nuclear exercises on May 19 and will continue until May 21. Let's discuss this briefly. The nuclear issue often sparks fear, even if Russia may not plan to use such weapons. What are your thoughts?
The journalist says there isn't, even if we don't really fear that Russia will use nuclear weapons, but for example, I am very afraid of it. This fear that it could be used against anyone, it doesn't matter. Even if it's used against some small country, it will still have irreparable consequences. Not only environmental, but first and foremost, the economic market will simply collapse. And for a very long time. But apparently the old man has no concerns at all.
As for Ukrainians, you need to understand that nuclear weapons come in different types.
Wow, what a twist. Truly a godlike analyst.
This scares the Americans, this scares the British. These are intercontinental ballistic missiles and the like, which are simply technically impossible to use against Ukraine.
Man, intercontinental missiles are strategic weapons. These are the kind of weapons that would only be used as a last resort. But tactical nuclear weapons, those are not intercontinental. Of course they exist, and there are such weapons. But for the most part, for example, these are weapons that operate at relatively short distances. Low-yield so-called clean weapons. There are so many types of them as well. And saying that these are only intercontinental missiles is just not true. This old man simply doesn't understand nuclear weapons at all. He doesn't understand them at all. Not in any way. Well, here, at least open Wikipedia, the simplest thing. Open Wikipedia and look up what tactical nuclear weapons are, what strategic ones are. Then you can also look up what the dead hand is. That's so you get a little scared, at least a bit. Instead of just talking about it with journalists, like, yeah, it's impossible, nothing to worry about, it's just some kind of nuke. We'll be sitting with the silver carp, evolving in radioactive caves. This is just insane. I have no idea where we're heading. And then another expert, the ever-smiling Nazvatailov, says that Belarus isn't scary, and it turns out the US is actually behind Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, is a beacon for much of the world, especially the democracies. It's like in Warhammer, there's a beacon that helps you navigate the warp, psi emission. But let's not get into that anyway. So we have Nazvatailov here, this beacon, together with Ukraine.
My friend Jason is a longtime skeptic, a Eurosceptic, but when he came here and saw our technology, he realized how far even the United States of America lags behind Ukraine. In particular, he mentioned the Ukrainian system there. It's so far ahead of everything else that it really impresses Americans.
Yes, well, the drone system is really impressive. You can't argue with that because it's being improved and evolving every day, and in combat conditions at that. But at the same time, it means that Ukraine is basically just a testing ground for various types of weapons. And it's not just any testing ground like some small island or atoll where they test nuclear weapons and only iguanas and turtles suffer, which is also bad. But here hundreds of thousands of people are suffering, and to say that this is a good thing, well, you probably shouldn't be Svetailov to believe that. Well, that's how things are. I'm already getting into philosophy and sociology here, into things you shouldn't really get into in videos like this. But nevertheless, I think you got the main idea. Overall, things in Europe are moving toward restrictions on the rights of male refugees from Ukraine. Little by little, step by step in small increments. Someone was deported here, then the pressure was increased there. Somewhere else, things got even tighter. That's why, as I said, it's better to look for a job if you haven't found one yet, learn the language, and become a sought-after specialist in the country where you are currently staying. Then you can switch to other statuses without any problems. Well, that's all. Goodbye, everyone.
I didn't watch it. You don't need to watch anything to understand what it was about. And it's enough to see the last names or a photo to understand that this is a Kremlin special operation, a Kremlin FSB Information Psychological Special Operation, IPSO for short. And this person from Ukraine, I basically understood who she is. That one, creature number 1, was preparing, and creature number 2, the interviewer, was getting ready to shoot another episode of pro-Russian propaganda. I'm sure Moscow was behind this. Being president of a country at war for 5 years, no matter your opinion of him, right? It would show in his appearance and behavior. If he used drugs, there would have been scandals already, like with Yeltsin. So I think that's impossible. It's all absolutely just a psyop.